know, sun top, sun apogee, some pair. I don't who knows what we would say. Sun top in Pineland, whatever it is. At any rate, it's 11 a.m. here in the United States East Coast. So I guess I should say happy lunchtime to you all, or if you're on the West Coast, maybe it is sunrise for you. Getting a little bit later show. We'll see if we get different audience for that. I meant to come on earlier, but there were some things that had to be taken care of, and here I am now. So, purpose of today's show just to cover some big things in the news. Not going to be a super long one today, although I've said that times and sometimes it runs longer, but still trying to recover here, not feeling particularly great. So thank you for those of you who have been sending your prayers, your kind wishes. Want to give a special thanks to J&M out in Arizona. You know who you are. Thank you. We really appreciated your note that came. Very kind of you. Thank you. If you want to support the program, P.O. Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine, 04739. The Venmo CVC PRV. Join the Telegram community, t.me/Atlantic Homeland. And you can find me at New Albion at protonmail.com and check out the books on Audible and Amazon. I've been getting some great feedback from our readers and editors who are looking at the early copy of the book, trying to have it out around the end of this week, around early this weekend. Not promising it's going to happen that way, but I'm hopeful that it will. We'll see how this all works out. So I'm not sure yet how that's going to work, but we're trying to make the draft as good as possible and improve it with more useful advice about how to survive the fall of America. And I think the additions that are coming in, thanks to the comments from some of the people I trust as readers, are really going to be helpful to you in the quality of the book coming forward. So hopefully that will be a blessing to everyone. All right, so let's get into the gist of the show. Let's start the case with Moldova. No one knows anything about Moldova. It sounds like one of those countries they made up that came after the fall of the Soviet Union. But what it basically was, if you want to think of it, is if Romania was one group of people, Moldova was the people on the east side of the Carpathian Mountains, pretty much. It's kind of how it works out, too. And historically, the kingdom had been absorbed by Romania at times, Poland by others. It's primarily Romanian, but it does have some strange groups of people because the area around the Black Sea was a trade region and different groups of people ended up being there. For a while, there has been a separatist region there called Transnistria. They have people who apparently, I want to make sure I get this right, are of Turkic origins but are Orthodox believers who are connected to Russia and have stationed there a Russian-friendly base in the far eastern border. It would be like if you cut off the easternmost county of Maine, which by the way is Washington County, and you had a Russian base situated there in Moldova. Moldova, in response to what's been happening in Ukraine, has sought to buddy up to Europe very quickly. First, it tried neutrality, but then as Russia kept becoming closer, it has now sought admission to the European Union, as well as we have seen actions, potentially, at least the Russians claim, that the Poles and the Romanians are planning on going in there with an expeditionary force. I hear corroboration of this on both sides, as the Russians are making, apparently what has begun today, a hard push west of Kherson and Melitopol, that they're moving towards Odessa, and that NATO doesn't want to lose the last port in Ukraine. Here's Ukraine for what it's worth. And so we're starting to see pushback happen there. So to Transnistria, if Transnistria played the same role to Moldova that the Donbass did to Ukraine, you'd understand it, except that the Transnistrians have not been persecuted by the Moldovan government, and yet they have been claimed as a separate enclave by Russia. Now, this is something we saw. Go back to Crimea, go back to Donbass, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Even some people would say Chechnya, depending on how you're looking at it. Not some point to get into the weeds of every one of those details, other than to say that this is one of those situations where the breakup of the USSR put Russians on one side of the line and Russia on the other side of the line. So it's very confused, and this is what happens when empires fall. There's similar cases in Kazakhstan in the northwest, for instance. These are just things you have to deal with. But what has ended up happening is apparently, from what I'm understanding on the ground in Transnistria, is that the Moldovan government, with the help of the Romanians and others, is working very quickly to have aggressive actions. They took down the radio station, and there's been reported fighting in the capital of Transnistria. I can't even remember the name of it. That the Moldovans are basically trying to make sure that they have security within their country before the Russians get there, because they don't want a fifth column, and they think the Russians are going to try to destabilize their country, take Transnistria, and fear that, just like they're doing in Ukraine, they may take the points they all want, and which in this case would be to go right up against those those mountains and take all of Moldova. So we're seeing a race happen here, and there's a couple different pieces to it. One is the legitimate fear of the Moldovan government that Russia is going to annex them. Two is the desire by NATO to change where the front is happening. Some people think this is a distraction from those people who are still trapped at the bottom of that steel factory in Mariupol. But Russia has made clear, their generals have said it publicly, that their intention is to annex all of southern Ukraine, or at least take control there. They might have friendly Novorossiya, but basically a puppet state, much like Belarus is. So what we are seeing is actions being taken proactively by the Moldovan government, and that NATO is pushing in there in an effort to deny Russia there to go there, and also potentially to ensure that there's a good way to get weapons in, which that border represents for them, as well as potentially getting a more friendly defensive line for if a larger operation is contemplated. Increasingly, the Russian media is defining this as the second great patriotic war against the West. And you see the push in NATO, including news coming out of Germany today that Germany is going to be sending them some considerable anti aircraft and anti missile units, armored units that represent the first heavy artillery going in there. We hear that also the, German media is reporting that there is supposed to be a meeting next week of 40 nations at Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. I believe it's an Air Force base. I might be wrong about that, but I think that's right. Where basically it's a war council, if you want to think of that, of all the West. And we are hearing as well, the Daily Mail reported yesterday that Sweden and Finland are expected to submit their applications to join NATO on May 22nd, which is less than a month from today. So we definitely see all the pieces coming into Ramstein Air Base.
Du hast mich.
Exactly.
Du hast.
Well, weren't they the ones who said we were all living in
Du
America?
hast mich. What?
Weren't they the ones who said we're all living in America? We're all living in America. America. It's Gunderbar. This is not a love song. Yeah, it's true. If you want to check out a great funny video, go find the version. Yeah, Coca-Cola sometimes war.
Coca-Cola.
It was a moment. I'm glad that we're not the only ones who recognize this. It's a great song where they show the fake moon landing. Thank you, Stanley Kubrick. He died for that one.
I love German industrial music.
Of course you
do. I know
do.
it's like some of it can be
Why
like,
do you love German industrial music?
Because I really like industrial sounding things, like
True.
factories and
when
machines.
we lived by the mill in Jackman, you loved the mill sound.
I loved living
Or like
by
my
that
wife
mill.
goes to me, and it's true stories from the life of a married man. My wife goes to me and is like, "Do the dishwasher in the morning. I like the industrial sound." She said that
It's
to
like,
me.
I don't want to
really
wake
happened.
you up. I'm like Pickle Rick. It's totally fine if you run the dishwasher in the morning
This really happened.
because I find those sorts of sounds comforting to me. I like the sound of an air conditioner as long as it's not like malfunctioning. It has to be a properly functioning machine.
Can you hear it?
What?
The dishwasher should be running right now. It must be on a rinse cycle. That's why you can't hear it.
No,
The dishwasher.
I can't hear anything. I think
No,
it's
you
done.
can't hear it. It can't be done. I just set it to run.
As long as the
Unless it's
appliance is running as it should, and there's no like weird boops and bobbles, then I don't mind listening to ambient background noise.
Oh yeah, no, ambient
like
industrial
fans
is fun.
and
It's comfy.
I like it.
It's like when we used to watch those industrial machine things. It's interesting. It's amazing the creativity people come
But
up
I
with
do
this.
miss the lumber mill. I loved listening to
The
that
lumber mill was good. Yeah,
Oh,
that
it
was
the
good.
best.
I saw Rammstein live, writes Patrick. They shot sparks and all that stuff over the crowd. It was pretty rad. Absolutely. And Corey
That's
says
so cool.
he used to be a big industrial guy, aka Rivet Head. Yeah, no, I mean it was a period. I understand. I wasn't as much with it, but I had a lot of friends who were, and I've learned some of it after.
I really like that. There's the steampunk aesthetic though from the industrial.
Yeah. Oh, it's good. But in any case, since we're going into Krieg, as they say in German, or war, that's where that literally comes. It means lightning or Blitzkrieg, if you can't break it up. And look, my ability in the German language is non-existent, and I'm fine to stay there. But so they're meeting in Ramstein. I know NATO's going to be there. I've heard Japan's being invited. Who knows who else is there? And I've heard a rumor that they're going to push pretty hard to figure out a way to get India on the side that they want to have, to figure a way to some combination of carrots and sticks. We'll see if that happens. I don't know. I mean, India probably doesn't feel good being on the side with China, but they have a lot of defense connections with Russia. Also, another interesting story, just put it in the back of your head. Apparently, they're building a giant border wall on the southern border of Turkey. All right, I know you were hoping of something here. No, they're not doing that here. Although apparently a court ruled that Biden can't remove the Title 42 protections that are about how people are deported. So leave that aside. That's not why I'm covered today. But it's interesting. The Turks are saying they're building a wall along the Syrian Iraq border because they're anticipating massive refugee traffic coming in later this year when the food harvest doesn't come in. And that's not an unreasonable expectation. For instance, if you were to look at the single biggest country who imports grain and wheat from Ukraine, you would find it's Egypt. Whole lot of people, not a lot of food. And Egypt's got another problem too, actually, and this may lead to war in Africa. Ethiopia, in the effort to electrify their nation, has built a giant dam at the top of the Nile River that they estimate may take as much as 10% of the water flow out from the Nile. And the way irrigation happens in the Nile, which is since it's happened since time immemorial, is they count on the floodplains to provide the water to the crops, and then they have passive irrigation. I mean, these systems in a lot of ways go back to ancient Babylon and the flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates. Not that the Nile didn't have as old a civilization, but you understand. So what's going to happen is, and there was a fight over this. Now, mind you, the dam isn't completed yet, so this might be a year out, but it's coming. Is that Egypt and Ethiopia may fight a water war over the Nile, and it's not uncommon. Egypt and Nubia often fought in ancient history. It's the same sort of people fighting the same sort of battles. But in the short term, Egypt's got a bigger problem, which is that they're not going to have the ability to take care of their own people. And then maybe, maybe they knew that. Makes you wonder why they were moving the capital from Cairo to that new administrative center they picked east of there. Maybe because they didn't want to have the angry horde come after them. But you look at failed states like Iraq, you look at a failed state like Egypt, you look at Syria and all its problems, and Turkey's deciding. At the one hand, they're kind of going in there and trying to control certain areas. They're fighting in Syria, they're fighting in Kurdistan, they are preventing the Russians from coming in there, but they're also building a wall, which is interesting, to prevent the basically inflow from Africa and from the Asian world, which is sort of different, right? Because we haven't seen Turkey doing all that much to stop immigration recently, although Erdogan likes to talk out both sides of his mouth. And remember, where were we seeing bad immigration? In the West, but also in the East. Remember, before all this broke in December, what were we talking about? We were talking about migrants coming through Belarus, being helped by the Russians as well to break into Eastern Europe, and that the Poles actually had put troops on the borders there. So, very strange situation with how people and the movements of people are coming forward. Speaking of movements of people, we hear rumors about lockdowns potentially coming to Beijing like they have in Shanghai. So people have been out panic shopping at that point to get a lot of goods on their own hands. And the clog of ships around Shanghai, they estimate that the backlog may affect supply chains for as much as 3 months to a year, maybe even longer for certain products because of what it's going to cause for the industrial development. So China's in a very weird spot as we see them continue to go forward and develop their relationship, trying to get to Solomon Islands. Australia's made clear in no uncertain terms they are not going to allow China to have a base there, and these could be potential causes, belly points of where the war could shake out. So we'll have to keep a very close eye on how that plays out. But what does seem to be happening is I think there is a determination in the West that they are going to fight a larger war. And I think we are just going through the preliminaries in this. If you want to think of the Donbass as the annexation of the Sudetenland, if you're trying to use your World War II comparisons, where Czechoslovakia then falls apart. And if you don't remember the history of it, what happened is, people talk about Munich and Hitler. Just so I assume most of you know the history, but some of you don't. If you don't, then hit like and subscribe because you need to know better. And if you do, hit like and subscribe because you're one of the smart ones. Okay. See, I got everybody. Isn't that smart? What ended up happening was that after the Anschluss of Austria, where Austria was basically pushed aside very quickly, Hitler's goal was to reunite the people who had traditionally been part of the First Reich into the German Empire. And so there were two big groups of people left. There was Sudeten Germans, because Bohemia had long been a part of the Reich, although the state of Czechoslovakia was made after World War One, as a lot of states, as was the Danzig corridor, which would actually lead to World War Two. And that was a mess. Look, the Germans caused a lot of problems. The Poles weren't being too good either. Maybe if what's his name, the Marshal Paderewski, do I remember right? Maybe if he hadn't died, it would have worked out differently. And there's timelines where the Germans and Poles got along pretty good. This wasn't it. Nonetheless, what happened is that the Czechs had a pretty strong alliance with the French, and were counting on that. And the Sudeten area was the mountain country on the western border where the forts were the Czechs, but they were the German people had lived as well. So when that land was given over to the Germans by the infamous Peace in Our Time speech by Neville Chamberlain, which, as much as it's been knocked, might not have been the worst of all things. who knows how the war would have operated at a different time. What ended up happening was that the rest of the country fell apart. The Czech Republic got absorbed into Germany, and Slovakia became a rump state, much like we might see in Ukraine, where Donbass gets, taken as the Sudetenland, south and eastern Ukraine, which we could call Novorossiya, which they sometimes call it, will be annexed there. Kiev may or may not be part of that mix. I think for the Russians, they want it to be, but we'll see if that's the case. And then the rump part of Western Ukraine will survive. If Kiev's part of it, it'll be a state. If not, it'll be Poland. And that's how that'll probably happen. Maybe with some small chunks in Carpathia going to Hungary. And there's a little part, I forget the name of it, that's Romanian as well, that might get absorbed in. And then we'll have, I don't want to say cleaner borders. Poland will look like the letter Q, but we'll have borders that are perhaps more reflective of those people. And maybe it'll help Poland as well as some of these other countries by having that western area to take the displaced Ukrainians and expect to see Live built up as, I hate to say it, but almost like a Quebec within Poland. I mean, it will be weird because they've spent so much effort in supporting Ukrainian culture, and the Poles, their whole thing has always been about Polonization. So eventually, some deals could have to be made. And if I guarantee you, if there's a war against Russia and the West wins, Kaliningrad will be speaking Polish by the end of it. But we'll see what happens with that. Nonetheless, the Russians are moving forward. The lines are moving, and the push is strong at this point. And I'm sure Putin, whatever his plans are, is going to want to have some major victories to report by May 9th, which is the big Victory Day parade. Another thing we've been seeing is increased reporting of attacks in Russia proper. We've seen that the new heavy weapon systems being sent in to include missile strikes from armored missile carriers from the U.S. that are going to be approved have potentially a 600-kilometer, or let's call it, what would you say? It's about 6/10 of that. So it would be about, let's say, 360-mile range. Am I doing my math right? Yeah, 360-mile range that you could be in there, seeing the Ukrainians take pot shots into Russia, and I would imagine Belarus. But every side is increasingly defining the others as combatants, and we are seeing the mass mobilization of troops on all sides to get ready for a larger conflict. At the same time, we've seen the destruction of the crop yields, or Russia to some extent because of the manpower being pushed into the army, Ukraine because of the conflict happening there, a lot of states setting up border patrol controls where those goods are not going to come in. Crop yields in South America are down heavily, as well as in the United States with late frost, other issues, and then the bird flu issues had going around. I was reading about another big tranche of several tens of thousands of chickens being killed, but yet no one's even proved that this is happening in some way. So they're certainly being overly aggressive about Ice Age Farmer had a good video about that, about how people are starting to stand up against this. If you are someone who wants to get into personal livestock or poultry, I would say you better do so now, because it seems like a lot of states are trying to limit this under the guise that there is a health issue. And who knows, there may be birds getting sick. I mean, birds get sick a lot. That's not uncommon.
No, there are a lot of the big producers have
Yeah, I mean, it's
said,
just, and it's,
I mean, it's a thing.
yeah, and it's very possible, to be very honest with you, that this is something that's being deliberately spread, because what we're seeing is the destruction of the food supply. We've talked about the many situations on this channel where you've seen different factories shut down, different burnings, arsons, a plane crashing into one, right? We've been seeing also the railroads are saying, well, we're not going to transport fertilizer. Well, I'm like, that's not going to go brilliantly. And there are multiple stories from the US and the UK about how the government is paying people more money not to grow things than grow things at a time when food scarcity is going to be a major problem. You will eat the soy and you will like it. And by soy, they mean Soylent Green, if you know the old movie shtick. So that's something we're going to have to watch as it plays out in the near future. On the domestic side, everyone wanted to talk about Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter yesterday, that this is apparently ongoing. Looks like the deal is being worked out, the final details of it, but this is going to happen. And the meltdown that happened from the woke left was absolutely insane. And on this channel, we really do try to be post ideological, but most of us come from right wing perspectives. I'll just be honest with it. Not all of us, and that's okay if you didn't. It's not the idea that individual versus collective. You need to consider both. Nonetheless, the people who've been out there promoting the worst forms of degeneracy for the very longest time are now in a position where they are running because they're afraid that, they're going to be free speech Nazis, I literally read, which I thought was kind of a curious conflagration of words. But you know what? Word salad comes out of their mouth all the time, and they don't think. They just say what the next current thing is. So the idea that Elon Musk may use Twitter to open up public debate is, I think, a healthy thing and a good thing, because I think that it's better for us to talk over differences than have to fight over them all the time, because people get deplatformed. And look, there's a part of me, if I'm very honest with myself, who's been deplatformed, that is looking very forward to the fact that this pushback is coming in a big way. You are not seeing the people in Florida stop. You are not seeing DeSantis slow down. You are not seeing the war against groomers and pedophilia stopped. And the thing about it, if we're really honest, is I'm not here to endorse the sin of sodomy or carnality in general that our culture is obsessed with. And I'm not here to say we need to put people, in physical harm for their beliefs. I'm not here to say that at all. But I will say this. For a very long time, that bar has been moving further and further left to the point where if you are a lesbian who criticizes a transgender for knocking out your ability to compete in sport because of or because of legitimate biological difference, you're now a bigot. So I suspect what we're going to find is there's a great many more people ready for a pushback, and I would suspect what we will also find is that pushback is not going to stop when it comes back to dead center. It's going to continue, and we'll see if the people who were used to controlling through soft power are able to go through hard power. But this is one of the interesting things. There is a growing sort of, how should I put it? There's a little bit of a backbeat I'm seeing happen in society, even through institutional parties, although they're terrible carriers for it, of that the culture war is beginning to hit a wave and it's beginning to go the other way. Good morning, Tim. And see, there are dissident leftists here, and you know what? Ultimately, I've often said, and you can mark me on the record for this, a good policy will probably be socially right and economic left, to some extent, because people have real needs, and it's not all their fault that the government screwed them. If we're going to rob people of being poor, let's not go after food stamp people. Let's go after BlackRock. Let's go after Vanguard. Let's go after the Fed. Let's go after the IRS. Let's when we've appropriated all those assets, then we can have a conversation about fraud of welfareism. Okay, but people don't think that way because it's too big for them, and the institutionality is very difficult to understand. But when we're talking about the social matrix of it, what we are seeing, I think, and one of the positive outcomes of COVID maybe was that a lot of people having time to not have to go to work are reprioritizing their lives. Their priorities that they're choosing are not necessarily good. However, the priority they're not going to choose is slaving for work at minimum wage or in a terrible situation where inflation is outpacing it. If you're making minimum wage at this point, right, you are not making enough to pay your bills. And some Democrats, there was even a Democrat said pay 30 people $30 an hour. Well, that would break the economy. But the idea that people be able to make a wage that actually has meaning is a question we need to figure out in life. And it's not just a simple question as raising the wages. The question is, why do things cost so much? And that gets into a conversation about inflation, debt, the role of banks, and the role of toxic debt. And I support generally a lot of debt amnesty. I'm tired of only big companies and the government being able to write off their debts indefinitely. It's time for people to be able to do the same things. But a larger reset like that will never be contemplated, because then the control that the people who run our society have over us goes away. So instead, what will we get? We'll probably get World War III, because then you can write off debt much more easily when in defense of the nation and our values. But this is the interesting thing. What are our values? Because the funny thing is, the very people the West needs to fight for them are the very people they've spent the last 20 years mocking, going against. And if we go back, if we really think about our history, go back to 2001, the sort of rah-rah patriotism that said fight for America, where blood and treasure was lost in the desert, as well as a lot of lives on both sides, can they pull that same trick again in 2022? Can they make Vlad the Impaler terrible enough? And the answer is they're going to try. And whatever that means in terms of terrible stories. And we see how one-sided the reporting is. We see how you see the criminalization in multiple countries, of reporting things that are against the Ukrainian side of the narrative. And look, I'm not here to whitewash Russia. Russia's version of Eurasianism, the Duginism they're running with, it has this idea that we're here to be the standard and defender of traditionality. So who do they defend? One day they're defending orthodoxy, which is a Christian I very deeply support. And it heartens me to see the rebirth of orthodoxy in the dark heart of atheism that was communist Russia. But they're also supporting Islam, and they're supporting Buddhism, and they're supporting all these other things. And they have this idea that they're going to have a multi-ethnic state that's going to be multicultural and multi-religious. Sounds a bit like something we tried here in the United States, the very root of all of our problems. And that's why I refuse to see Russia as the good guy, because they're out there apologizing for atheistic China, who literally was going out, I kid you not, criticizing the Swedes for how they treat their Muslims. Is there a Uyghur in the house? Just saying, or Uyghur, however the hell you say it. I mean, really, it's absolutely crazy how that actually works. But this is the world we live in. And of course, what happens is the propaganda is disconnected from the reality of what's happening. Apparently, we value files of radioactive rubble, writes Brian. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And the FBI is already programming people to expect cyber attacks on the supply chain. Sure, they are. And you know what? They've talked about this, the food chain reaction game. All of these things have been talked about years. Go back to John Podesta. You remember Hillary's consigliere, the guy at Georgetown whose brother was seen over for old Pizzagate, yeah, you're not even allowed to mention those things anymore. And look, I don't want to sound crazy, but you think here's what I believed for a very, very long time, and I'll just say it just point blank: the people at the top of a lot of systems are literally blackmailed into doing unethical things so that they can be controlled by the people who put them in positions of power. Why trust people when you can control them directly through puppet strings? And do some of them like it and engage it? Probably most of them do. Do some of them do it despite that? Maybe. Are there good people out there? Haven't met many of them, but I'm sure there's a couple who slip through the cracks, if only to give people hope, because false hope is a very deadly thing. After all, everyone's been waiting 2 more weeks for Q to the point where it's now at the letter V or Z. Nonetheless, people are going to believe what they want to believe, and they want to have false hope in the system, which is one of the reasons why I wrote Surviving the Fall of America. So if after that book you still have false hope, I recommend you check yourself into a mental health institution, because you are, in fact, delusional and you do need help. Not that I really support the system, but hey, you know what? Sometimes people need things. Who am I to judge? All right, so back to Twitter and Elon Musk. So the meltdown has been ongoing, and the thing about Musk is being set up as a populist hero that the right can support, and this worries me because you look at his two big projects, or you look at his three big projects. Tesla, where the cars, yeah, they're on electricity, great, but then they can be controlled by the grid. One other problem, you'll be shut off from them. Then you look at what is it, Starlink, the satellites everywhere, free internet for everyone, great. Surveillance grid, which literally is being used to help run targeting in some cases in Ukraine by people on the ground. And then you have Neuralink. Hey, we're going to put a chip in your brain and you'll get along so great. I think I was reading, I don't know if it was Neuralink or it was someone else, because I don't want to get in trouble for saying the wrong one. They put these chips in like 17 monkeys or whatever, and they all killed themselves, or at least most of them did. This is not a healthy technology. This is a person who's experimenting with things that should not be experimented with. And so why does he go after Twitter now? You want to believe the short tale. He's a South African who's seen how things can go badly. And if you want to see a signal case of how things go badly, look at South Africa. Um, and the idea is maybe free speech prevents that. Maybe people can put honest opinions. Maybe, he just doesn't want to see certain things. It's a nice story. It's probably not a realistic one. People don't spend $50 billion on things that are nice. So what is it instead? It's a means to control and shape opinion in a way that hasn't been done before. And, you have to wonder, because so much of the West's power apparatus is based on soft power shaping opinions, what they call it, performative speech, the idea of normalization and denormalization, where you work against people. You basically start indoctrinating people from the time they're fetuses. I'm not even joking with the way they think about things. And as Corey says, that's actually another good point. I wasn't going to say that, but you're right. That Musk serves as a pressure release valve in the same way that Trump did in many ways. So, do I think it's a good thing? Look, Twitter couldn't get much worse. Nonetheless, the idea that we are being presented a happy alternative, anyone who is able to spend $50 billion probably isn't your friend. It's just the reality of it. You don't get to that level without having played ball at too many levels. And Lord knows, when you get into the history of, controllers, you go into the Rhodes Scholarships, the roles of, families in South Africa. I know his family's caught up in what was I going to say, in emerald mining, and the mother's got all these weird occultic tendencies. Not good to feel. I don't feel good about him. Or if you listen to Grimes, who literally pledges her allegiance to AI. I pledge allegiance to the world's most powerful computer. Roku's Basilisk shows up. Just saying. And then they named their kid something that seems like a virus code. There's a lot of problems there. And so, is this an opportunity for people to put the message to people who wouldn't otherwise understand it? Yeah, you can win those battles one by two, but don't think you're going to win the whole society that way. The whole society is going to be won when we go ahead and move away from technology and move toward direct interaction, where society has a different version of our lives. Otherwise, we might as well just be uploading the Wreck-It Ralph virus for all it's worth. I mean, which was a cute movie, by the way. Yeah, it was funny. We watched Ralph Breaks the Internet last night because we were doing something calming and relaxing. Today is my rest day, so I'm not dealing with any bad news. And for me, war isn't really bad news. It's the fact that we continue our daily struggle that I know a lot of you guys share with us, where we have, let's say 1 foot and 4 toes in the world to come, and we have 1 toe stuck being threatened to cut off by predators in the world of this one. So it's something we all have to deal with as we watch. One of the things I saw, and I put in the what was I going to say, in the Telegram group, was that new home construction went down, I think, at like 11% last month. And what is this reflective of? That the construction industries, which had been shielded to some extent because of the cheap money, they, in response to the inflationary economy, they're going to shut down because the Fed's response to raise the rates on the discount rate are going to price people out of the market. So the good news and bad news is at the very good time, at the time you're going to want to be moving, if you haven't already, and if you have, good for you, you won. You're going to see property prices are still too high, and they're going to linger a little bit, but a property price crash is going to come because no one can afford mortgages. So at by the end of this summer, if you have time, and this is the bet you're making, because things could fall apart really fast, in which case you're stuck there, which is why being in a place you want to be is an essential priority. Even if you're not buying yet, getting to roughly where you want to be is smart, so then you can, occupy as need be. What you would end up doing is you're going to see a crash in property prices. It's going to have all sorts of other problems because people simply cannot afford the goods and services being out there. With houses, they're sort of optional where people can stay, although what you'll see is a crash in home owning prices, and then people might go in there. A lot of more rent to owns, and people will be desperate for money, people will be desperate for a place to live, and that will lead to housing riots to go along with the food riots and energy riots. I mean, next winter, we're not going to be able to keep warm. It's going to be a big problem, and no one seems to realize it or talk about it because people are just glossing over it. You need to be aware of that. And the breakdown of the dollar is going to be at the heart of that story. Although, what was interesting, I saw another piece that the price of gold is starting to go down. And this feels totally artificial to me, but it's a way of it's a secondary attack on the strength of the ruble that's developing, because it's very embarrassing for the elites who run the banks and soft power to watch the ruble, through the contracts that Russia's requiring where payment for gold is made in rubles, continue to strengthen at the same time these sanctions are coming in. So the purchasing power of your average Russian consumer, even though their ability to get goods may be circumscribed to some extent, though less than you would think. Most goods they get from the West are luxury goods. They don't have a lot, but they do know how to meet their needs after how many years of sanctions. What we're seeing is that the banks are understanding the strength of Russia is in the gold. And the idea that gold has intrinsic great value is something we probably should talk about. You guys know I've been doing research for future work I want to do on Atlantis. And I would expect three sets of books to emerge from this, actually, if the world doesn't blow up before then. The first one will be a reader of some sort with the first primary text that you want to have, and that'll be a collation where I put it together so that you can follow along with the mystery yourself. The second, which might be the third, will be my own thoughts as to the history of what happened. It's too fascinating to not comment on, but I'm not anywhere near deep enough. And then, of course, the fiction book that will tell the story of a great empire and its fall because of its embrace of degeneracy and how good men stood against it, how they were corrupted and how they came out of it. And literally, at the end of it, we'll end up basically with the flood story where God comes in and, solves the problem that man couldn't, which is basically what we're promised in Tribulation and Revelation. It's not the sort of story you get, but a grand epic in scope where we see the good man, even if one good man survives. In the Bible, like think of the case of Gideon, how you have one good man, essentially against an army that he can win. And God literally says, you need fewer men and more of me. And it's one of the things we remember and cherish as Christians, are promised that victory is won in the end, that Savior's already won. He defeated death. It's just a matter of him to come back to clean up the mess that we're left in. And yet this mess is very difficult for us. But with respect to talking about Atlantis in particular, one of the interesting things that you begin to discover as you look at it is you go through these ancient mythologies and you start to realize that every culture kind of has this backdated mythology of what happened. And you see this war of West versus East set up, Atlantis versus Lemuria, the flood that happens because of the own degeneracy, whereas, they couldn't have lost the battle one way and they'd lose it another. And that comes to the culture war that we're fighting. So there's a lot of, how should I say, resonance in what we're seeing now versus what was seen back then. But I do think that in writing the story and in telling the story, one of the things that I'm really enjoying is getting to see how, in an advanced society, the first time around, the problems they dealt with, at least metaphorically, which form a lot of the world's mythology, really are quite similar to what we are facing. And what it ends up being is their embrace of materiality, their belief that the system's going to save them. The idea in their own power is the root of their own issues, and that literally the world itself rebels against them for how they choose to live. And there's a lesson there for each of us that we need to get away from these problems rather than go more deeply into it. And whatever country you live in, whatever ideology you profess, what you can see is that every one of these ideologies is more concerned with the destruction of its opponent than it is the salvation of its own people. And we could say that in a simple material sense. These people don't even concept of morality. They're so caught up in this idea of relativity, and that's why, like I was saying, the Russian concept and the Chinese concept and the American concept. It's like you're forced to choose between three lesser evils, and look, you're probably gonna do what helps you survive, and I don't blame you for that. But the thing about it is none of them are good. And we spend in our society all the time trying to treat sickness instead of actually seeking health. That's why we say, the ends justify the means all the time, but they don't. The means make the ends. And in this community, in the Pineland community, we're always thinking, how do we find health? How do we find ourselves being well? And something I've struggled with, I've been dealing with a great deal of sadness lately, and depression and angst. And, part of it's me being sick, part of it's the stress of the times, part of it's health issues. There's a lot in there to unpack. But it's like one of the things I'm trying to look for is, where is health? And I look out there and I don't see it. I mean, sometimes we can experience it in our home, and there are things we can do. We can grow our own food. We can separate ourselves from society. We can choose not to be a part of this to the greatest extent possible. It's a vision I know is compelling to many people, myself very much included, because I don't like going out there in the world anymore. I don't like interacting. I see it as so many risks and liabilities of people who are caught up in strong delusions. And yet, I feel like if we're going to have chance, we have to seek health, and that's where it starts. It starts with faith. It starts with asking the Lord to help make you spiritually well. Because if you're not right in your heart and your headspace, you don't have any chance. And then you work on your own mental issues under that framework, and you find friends who can help you, and a community that might stand for you. And that's how you begin fighting this battle back. But in the medium term, I've realized that commenting on the world. I was talking with my friend Greg about this, and we were talking about it, and he said when he read my book there was a sadness in it. And one of the things that really struck me about that was that he's right. I am sad, and I'm leaving notes behind for people who are waiting too long to act, in the hope that it might find them and fortuitously help them in a moment where they might need more help. Because I mean, at this point, if you're not looking at the exits, I'm not really sure what you're waiting for. Things are going to overtake all of us, and we don't really know exactly what's coming, except maybe if you read the book of Revelations, you do. I mean, the Bible's had a better track record than a lot of this to this point. And I'd say take a look at it. I mean, even if you're not a believer, give it a chance. See if you think it explains things better than the talking heads on whatever your favorite network of choice is, and try to understand. And if you go back further and you see, one of the things I've learned, especially in studying, I study a lot of sources from the late 19th and early 20th century. A lot of information just got whitewashed behind the wall of ideology, where people don't ask that. People make a statement. This is how history works, whether it's a Marxist view or some other view of history. And then they just find the facts that are out there, and they leave beside the whole tapestry of it. And yet people were asking these questions. They were looking for evidence of a world that was very different than what we understand today, and that the conflicts are much older, much deeper. We were talking about gold and silver when we got into this conversation. Gold and silver were valued because they were how the temples of the ancient world were plated. In some places they were plentiful, in some places they weren't. But a lot of people say, "Oh, well, I support gold because it has electrical implications," or silver is really valuable because it has antibacterial properties, and those things are true. But they're not worth that much more. I mean, you have gold because it's a sacred object. It's a sacred object because it's been venerated as an idol since time immemorial. So even if you're a gold or silver bug, and I'm not saying that, those are the worst things in the world to be, but what I'm saying to you is money is still made up. Value is always based on utility. And if your utility, if, someone offered me, let's put it this way, if it's the end of the world and someone offered me 10 tons of gold or 10 tons of wheat, you're probably better off taking the 10 tons of wheat. And that's kind of the point you have to understand, that the bankers, using their soft power, are not going to just let gold be able to, undo their world. In fact, I'll give you an example. This is a historical example. It's the Spanish Empire. This was an example where, the bankers were not so much in Spain. They were more in the Holland, the Netherlands, and England. And so Spanish, even though they were bringing in gold like crazy, the value of it massively decreased. Or Venice against Genoa and Florence. Florence had the first banks that were really trying to rival as nation banks against Venice. And the Venetian bankers literally undercut Eastern Orthodoxy and Byzantium by paying the Franks to sack Constantinople in the Fourth Crusade. And what they did was every time Florence tried to fight them by having a big stack of gold, all they did was they took the silver, which was venerated as an object of moon worship, which is more important in China, to bring tons of gold from China across the Silk Road to the point where Florence couldn't cover their banks in a margin call. And what happened was this, the Florentine industry was destroyed. Florence ended up going into the papacy, and they had influence there. But the height of Florence was taken away. They married into France to try to resist, and this is what ultimately led partially to the League of Cambrai War, where everyone decided to go against Venice, and why you see the people who ran Venice go into Amsterdam and, should I say, into England, which was the root of a great many wars that happened, including the wars over the Reformation, Cromwell, some of the other things, War of the Spanish Succession, all those things. But what I'm saying to you is the bankers have the ability to rig value, and the idea that Russia's going to win this automatically because they have gold on their side. Well, gold is good. Gold has kept value over time. It's something a lot of people support, but don't undercut the price when you have all of international finance on the other side of things. These people are magicians and they're dark sorcerers. If you really start to understand this, they've been running the same racket through. If you really want to go back, we went back. We went back through, New York, Wall Street. We went to the City of London, Bank of England. We went to Amsterdam. We went to Venice. You want to go back further? Okay, let's go back further. Let's go to the city of Tyre and the city of Carthage that Rome fought against. And then we go back, who are the Phoenicians? What are the Canaanites? God himself said, get rid of these people because these sea people came from somewhere. And where did they probably come from? Well, if you trace it back far enough and you start studying the mystery, the Phoenician language, the alphabet they came from, really the Phoenician alphabet makes up a lot of things. They were seafaring folk who had influence, and you can see it in the linguistics, even going over to Central America. They were probably the survivors of Atlantis. And who were these people? People who claimed their lineage from gods or beings that came down and slept with the women of men. I mean, it's the story of Poseidon and Cleito, which is a name that we think of as Greek, but that goes back far further. And why does it do this? Because it's a story of when fallen angels slept with men. I believe this is all the same story, and they always treated us to worship the same things, to worship gold and silver. And what have those been? The idols since time memorial that were put on temples and therefore had value because we assumed if they were beloved of the gods, they would be beloved of the people. We beloved them because it's a way of us worshiping false paganism. Now, I know that's way too much for most people to unpack, but these are the mysteries you begin to uncover, and you start to realize the foundations on which we build our world are built on lies. And if you go deeper, you begin seeking the truth. And what is the truth? Well, the Lord Jesus Christ put it out there for you in the simplest of all ways. Love God above all else, the Father, the single, the being who created, the ultimate creator who created the universe, and as well as the Son and the Holy Spirit, which are the means that come to us as the Trinity. And if you begin to understand this, and even in Atlantis, supposedly the fight was between the sons of the law of one, that they believed in a single unitary God, that they believed there was a father, and at the same time, the people who stood against them were the sons of Belial, who were the people who believed in materiality, and that would be the solution for the future. So we really are fighting the same damn fight. The only difference is all the things you're not allowed to know because the world has been pulled over your eyes. And as we go through the age of technology, and a word I'm going to use more often, technomancy, this idea that technology can create new worlds. And if you want to see a vision of the future, you don't need to see it in some big ideology thing. I'll give you 3 movies to watch. You could go watch Ralph Breaks the Internet. You can go watch what's the guy, what's going with Ryan Reynolds? Free Guy, and you can go watch Ready Player One. That's the world they're going to give you, where they're going to augment reality, and reality is going to get worse, but you're not going to care because you're going to be linked in somewhere else, and increasingly you will be deeper and deeper into that world where you cannot escape. This is the story of human history, where we've come from a golden age of being at spiritual oneness, where we had a close connection with our Creator, and over time, how that has come to the point where now we are so disconnected that we literally seek to make ourselves machines so we will die with, if you want to believe hell's coming or the heat death of the universe, either way, you're burning up. It's just a question of how long you want to wait to ponder on the misery of your own destruction. Personally, I'm an optimist. I believe the Lord's coming faster and this is going to end quickly. Nonetheless, whatever you believe, this is where these stories are going, and this is the deeper story, which is why you're forbidden your own history. It's out there, and it's not impossible to find, but it's a story that they don't want to tell, and it's a story of all of us, of each man and each woman, where there is something of the divine in each of us, and the Holy Spirit waiting to be awakened, and there's a lot of the world in us, and can you overcome the world? Just like in some ways Christ instructed us to, so that we could be closer to God. And you start to realize, when you realize you love things irrationally, when you realize you're linked to things you can't get past, that's where you have to start asking questions. And I'm not going to pretend it's a happy process. Purging is never a happy process. Catharsis isn't. You're going to hate yourself, you're going to hate the world, and yet at the other side of it is there freedom. That's the great hope. And in that, there's a nature that might not be so offensive to God, that through grace you might be saved. And that is what we hope. That's my great hope anyway. But the story of what happened, in a lot of ways, you can learn more about the present from going into the distant past than you can from the propagandists who come out on all sides, because they're lying to all of us. We understand that, and we know that they have no hesitation in the amount of damage they're willing to do to all of us. So this is a story we're going to seek, and to the best of my ability, I'm going to tell it, and I'm going to spend a lot of time, and I hope you'll support me and the channel in this exploration. I'm going back to find some of these stories, because I think they're going to have a lot more relevance to what's coming ahead. Because I do think that what we are seeing, look at what they're doing at CERN, look at all these sort of technologies that they're embracing. Where literally we're exploring extra dimensionality, where we're seeing, the rewiring of the brain, we're seeing the inclusion of technology into biology. We're going to go into worlds that we haven't seen before, but they've probably seen us a very long time, and they have not been happy with us. Remember, the first story in the Bible is about the enmity of the serpent against us, right? And it was about the enmity of a fallen angel, of beings beyond our comprehension, really, lesser than God but greater than men in many ways, who were set against us. And in the sense, we had the protection of the Lord when we lived in a society that celebrated that. Now we have chosen to walk our own path, and we are now walking a path of horrors. So I can't pretend the future is going to be better. What I can say is the Lord does protect his own people. We see that throughout the Bible and throughout history, and that we who come together in that name have a chance to survive. And that's all we hope for it to be without as much pain, and for a chance for us to be there to see the other side of it, God willing, New Jerusalem. But if that's be further off, at least we can take care of one another in the hope that we have, and in faith in a good life where we can look upon something other than the world that we hate. And for the people who really understand that, hopefully there's a future for us wherever we live. And if it's not where you're at, then you need to get moving in your headspace and in your feet. So that's my message to you for today. Do you have anything you want to add, dear?
Okay.
Okay, so we'll close with a quick prayer. Heavenly Father, just pray that every person here has the courage to follow your vision for their life, to ask you for guidance, and that you may offer hope to those who are suffering. Lord knows we all need that, me more than anyone. So, in Jesus' mighty name, I just ask for a blessing of inspiration, and an understanding that you have a plan, a vision for all this and for all of us, and that you will not forget us. So, in Jesus' mighty name, I pray that. God bless each and every one of you. I will be back again soon. Keep an eye on Odessa. If something funny is going to happen, it's going to happen there. And we will be back later this week. I'll try to do maybe a Wednesday night show. I'm not promising, but if my health permits and things go okay, I will try to come visit you guys tomorrow night to meet you a little bit different crowd. So thank you for everyone who's been here. For those who support the program, for the prayers, that's the most important thing. But those who want to give, thank you for that. The P.O. Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine 04739, as well as the Venmo CVC PRV. And thank you for everyone who showed up today. Please share the contents with other people. Got to grow the channel. And, it's good stuff. The algorithm hates me. That's not going to change anytime soon. But
Like
you
and
judge.
share, that helps the
Yeah,
algorithm.
yeah. Liking and sharing helps the algorithm. Look, and we're gaming the system. I'm not even pretending otherwise. That's what we have to do these days. Because if I'm going to speak truth, I'm not going to get any help from them. And you know what? I'm not changing what I say for anyone, except for the Lord Himself. If He tells me to change it, then that's fine. Short of that, we'll speak to one another. God bless you guys. Have a great day. Pinelander out.